At Fide.email, we believe in protecting your privacy and supporting your faith. Fide.email offers peace of mind with features like end-to-end encryption and secure communications tools. Your data stays private and your values remain intact. Choose an email provider that understands what matters to you. Make the switch to Fide.email today. Ladies and gentlemen, we have what can only be described as a bombshell story out of the church in Germany. The church in Germany, as you are aware, has been the vanguard of the synodal push for a new church, a new religion, in their own language. And they use the McCarrick problem, as I am forced to call it because of the general rules of this platform and other places. But they use the McCarrick problem as their excuse. They basically make it sound like the old hierarchical structure of the church, that hierarchical structure that was born from the apostles, basically came from Christ himself, but developed organically from the time of the apostles all through to today. They make it sound like that hierarchical structure of the Catholic Church is responsible for the McCarrick problem. Wicked men in the priesthood who should never have been in the priesthood, many of them with, we'll call them unnatural inclinations, doing great harm to the most vulnerable. Specifically, often, the people who are the youngest and can't actually do anything to stop it. And what's worse is, of course, that the institutional church, we'll call these the men and the earthly human element of the church, were hiding these away. We're all familiar with this story. Unfortunately, the church in the United States was rocked with this right at the dawn of the war in Iraq, when the newspapers in Boston and New England dropped news articles that they'd been sitting on for literally years, that most people had actually kind of heard about anyway for years beforehand, and blew this up to discredit the church. The church's earthly element, the human element, had done a magnificent job of discrediting her anyway in the eyes of the public up to that time. I remember pop musicians of various kinds, rock musicians, making songs about McCarrick-type priests a decade or longer before all of that stuff happened. So the public knew already, but the media whipped things up into a fervor. Fast forward 30 years, and now we have the church in Germany using it as their excuse to remake the church, because the hierarchical nature, which stands in stark opposition to synodality, which is a decentralized, lay-focused authority pattern for the church, is more focused on, this all stands in opposition to that. They believe synodality will cure the church finally of this. They disregard the fact that it is men with the James Martin inclination who are the largest purveyors of this, but not exclusively. And so we have a story, as through that long-winded introduction, out of Germany, where we have cases of years of these kinds of things being hidden away, and not just hidden away. You see, the church in Germany has a unique relationship with the church in South America. There are a lot of priests with German names who come out of Argentina and other places, and some of that's because of the history of Argentina during and after the events of the 1940s, for why there are many people with German names there. But the church in Germany has had a long history with South America, to the point where there are many priests that come from German families in those parts of the world. There are many German bishops or bishops of German extraction serving in South America. And it turned out that the church in Germany would take these unfit men, and they would, when they looked like they were on the verge of being exposed, ship them off to South America. And they wouldn't ship them off to go sit in a cell somewhere, or to go sit in isolation in a monastery somewhere away from the general public where they couldn't do anything bad again. No, they were put into active ministry. This is an unfortunate story, and I do not enjoy reporting these things to you, but we go to, pardon my bad German, but Tagesschau.de with the headline, "Did the Church Hide Evil Wicked Priests Abroad?" And there are plenty of stories that they have here for you, and we're going to go over this fairly quickly. So we get to the article for the details. Quote, Joseph the German is what they called the priest who came from Bavaria to Brazil, to Imbabura, a city in the interior of the country. The population, deeply religious. For Nilva de Silva, it was an honor to work as a secretary for priest Josef Ludwig Zoltmann in the late 1970s and early 1980s. But what the believers of Imbabura still don't know is that the German missionary was on the run. An arrest warrant was issued against him in 1969 on suspicion of committing evil deeds of the flesh involving five young women who were still in school. High-ranking church representatives in Germany and Brazil, including an abbot and several bishops, were informed about the criminal prosecution at the time, but they did not cooperate with the authorities. This is documented by letters that the ARD political magazine Report Munich and the ARD studio Rio de Janeiro were able to view exclusively. Only when the crimes had expired did Zottmann return to Germany in the 1980s. The Diocese of Eichstätt secretly financed a priest by disguising his salary as missionary donation. The Eichstätt vicar general had the money transferred abroad via an intermediary monastery. Whereabouts unknown, he told the police. This is shown by documents from the Eichstätt Diocese archives that have been kept under lock and key. Former police officer Peter Grimm is currently working on the Zottmann case for the diocese's Independent Investigation Commission. The money trail played for a central role in the investigation. Even after he had fled and was abroad, money continued to be transferred to him, said Grimm. End quote. See what's going on here? This is a familiar story. This happened within the United States, unfortunately, at that time, when suddenly priests were on the verge of getting into some serious trouble, and so the bishop would call his buddy bishop half the country or full side on the other side of the country and ship him away to go become someone else's problem. This is, of course, overtly hiding the problem. Remember, this problem goes back to men with James Martin type inclinations in the priesthood, but not exclusively, because this was a priest with school-aged girls. In other words, this was somebody with what we would call distorted but otherwise natural inclinations. Distorted because of the age involved, obviously, and no, I'm not endorsing anybody being involved with anybody that age. But this is what we would call a systemic problem. The church, during its revolutionary period of the 70s and 80s after Vatican II, was in the business of hiding these priests away, until the laws that would bring these priests to justice had expired in Germany, and then they could come home and not be anybody's nuisance. And they took active measures to make this happen. And this is why people's faith in the institutional church has collapsed. This is one of the reasons in Germany you see people by the hundreds of thousands. In a country that does not have that large of a population, all things considered, that's an enormous amount. But hundreds of thousands of Catholics every single year in Germany leave the church. And this is one of the reasons that is cited, that these wicked bishops, many of whom now say mealy-mouthed things about wanting to fix this problem, but they use that as the excuse to then turn the church into some parody of itself. They are the ones to do it, who are responsible, or at least their spiritual fathers were, the bishops who came before them, or the two bishops before them. But these are the same kinds of men. What really needs to happen to take care of this problem is to crack down on the kinds of men who can become Catholic priests. But no one is ready for that conversation yet. Let's take a look here at the real meat of this. They shipped priests abroad. Back to the article. Quote, according to the local press office, several cases are also known from the Diocese of Trier. Among them is a priest who was prosecuted for the bad things of the flesh in Germany prior to a stay abroad. He was still deployed in Eastern Europe in the late 1990s. A second priest worked as a pastor in South America from 1966 onwards, although in this case too there were, quote, clear indications of possible cases of bad deeds in Germany as early as the 1960s. The press office of the Diocese of Trier explained in response to a request. The Diocese of Trier is also currently having such cases examined by an independent investigation commission, 60-odd years later. The expert on the reappraisal of the past and lawyer Bettina Jansen came across similar cases. She examined files on behalf of the Catholic Church, including for the German Bishops' Conference. Her conclusion: a wide variety of ways have been found to keep a priest undercover and to conceal and hide the connection to the diocese and to provide him with financial help. Jansen came across false names, accounts of middlemen, and hidden financial flows. The victims played no role in this. The lawyer and the mediator from Cologne speaks of, quote, a form of obstruction of justice, end quote. And now, the bishops today, they say all the right things you would hope they would say. Oh, this is bad, yada, yada, yada. That's all well and good. But they don't get to the meat of the problem. And you can tell they're not taking this actually seriously, because if you want to take care of this problem, there is a simple but uncomfortable solution. And that is to reiterate the Church's teaching on morality and ruthlessly enforce it for seminarians and priests and bishops. They don't want to do that. Instead, they try to change the church's teaching on morality to make it more open to the beliefs of the world. And that will only make this problem worse, far worse. There's also another solution to this problem, and that would be for the Pope to call all priests who have had these kind of things said about them, who it's more than, we have more than a suspicion that they have done it, but according to records, have done these things, and recall all of them to Rome, put them in a cell, and then give them the full judicial process that they are due as a basic human being. And if they have been found guilty, well, make a very public show of imposing the most permanent and final punishment that a state can impose, to send a message that this cannot ever be done again. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. They will not take this seriously. So I'm curious, are you surprised by this? That revolutionary forces in the church in Germany are using this very real problem as their excuse to try to change the church's morality. Does this surprise you that in the 60s and 70s up to the 80s, and it looks like the 90s, they'd ship these priests to Eastern Europe or South America, and they'd give them a stipend and pretend that they were on mission and no one knew where they were? Does that surprise you at all? Well, let me know in the comments if you're surprised in the slightest by this. If you like and subscribe, if you haven't, it does help. So does sharing this on social media, that helps too. Please pray for the church and for all the priests that we're talking about obliquely here and the people that were harmed. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.